slide by myself. I found it. It's nice.
Even wachten, Jan. One moment.
It's nice.
Ja? Kan de deur dicht? Kunnen we beginnen? Ik moet daarin kijken. Hè? Oké, goed. Ja. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to all of you on this 25th Dialogue Conference. I see many familiar faces, but I'm quite happy also to greet new participants. It was in 1991 that a Japanese professor came to the Netherlands to teach at the University of Leiden, where he was confronted with animosity and deeply rooted prejudice against the Japanese. Professor Muraoka soon learned about the reasons behind this, and in the years to follow, he and his wife took the opportunity to meet with several people who experienced the Japanese occupation of the Netherlands Indies firsthand, like Annie and Herman Goudswaard, Adrie and Wim Lindeyer. Welcome to both of you. Don Stefan, just to name a few. There were painful stories told, in which anger, hatred and aggression resounded. And Professor Muraoka came to realize that it was almost impossible to enter the future with only a vague idea of the past. And not just that, but also that without reconciliation, the wounds of the past will continue to hurt us. And that in order to achieve any reconciliation, one has to talk to each other and exchange opinions, feelings, and experiences in an open and honest manner. And he experienced how difficult that was, as we also see today, and recognize the challenges for a meaningful universal dialogue. We at Dialogue NGI learn to accept forgiveness and reconciliation as a process of reciprocity and not as a one-way event. And we realized that the road to the future starts with showing respect to the other as a human being and not longer as an enemy. In those days, an opportunity to face the challenge of a meaningful dialogue was offered through the publication of 2 books in Japan in the year 2000. One was Kisses to Nell and the Children, based on a diary written by Lindeyer Sr., who spent almost 3 years in a Japanese POW camp. And we are grateful to Melinda Barnard, who will present her recently published book, A Gate in the Wall, based on these notes. The other book, published in 2000, was titled Memories of Indonesia by a Japanese writer, Mr. Hayashi Edai. He came to the Netherlands to interview Mrs. Goudswaard, whose father was interned in a Japanese POW camp near Nagasaki. In July 2000, a gathering took place in the Netherlands in order to present these books. What was meant as a one-time event formed the beginning of our tradition of yearly dialogue conferences and symposia. We saw not only the first generation war experts and their children coming to these events, but increasingly interested people from other walks of life and different nationalities began to partake in the conferences, and new friendships came into being. We witnessed an increased interest in Japan, where yearly dialogue conferences are being organized by Yukari Tangana Suzuki, also present here. Welcome, Yukari. And we are grateful for the support from the Netherlands Embassy in Tokyo. I should also mention here the educational efforts initiated by Professor André Schram, whose father suffered from the heart conditions in a POW camp in Nagasaki. Also, André is present here. Welcome. The educational materials based on the story of his father are not only used in the Netherlands, but since they have been translated into Japanese, are also being taught at schools in Nagasaki. And soon these materials will also become available in Bahasa Indonesia. We are very grateful for initiatives undertaken by the people of Nagasaki, who together with our foundation and Yukari and André established a monument near the old Fukuoka 2 campsite, where yearly memorial happenings take place. This coming September, there will be a large gathering at the memorial site in Nagasaki to mark 80 years of ending the war, with a large foreign delegation, including descendants from Fukuoka 2 POW and representatives from the Dutch and other embassies involved. Also Nagasaki citizens, the Nagasaki Memorial Committee, and representatives from Nagasaki will participate. Since it was increasingly recognized that people from Indonesia also suffered during World War II and during the Independence War, it was felt that we needed to include Indonesia in our dialogue, or rather trilogue, and we became Dialogue NJI in 2009. In 2022, this trilogue became reality in a conference that was organized together with Universitas Erlangga in Surabaya, with cooperation from the History Department in Gadjah Mada University in Yogyakarta. In this regard, I want to also thank Onno Sinke and Ton van Zeeland for their great support in developing the conceptual framework and the program, and Aletta Kaper for training dialogue facilitators from Indonesia and the Netherlands. We are happy to welcome today Dr. Abdul Wahid, the head of the History Department in Gadjah Mada, who will present recent research by his students about trauma in the family. Over the years, intergenerational transition of trauma became an increasingly recognized effect from World War II. Trauma that was passed on from victims of World War II, also from those who we consider as perpetrators, to their children, and even further down the line. We are happy to welcome today Professor Taira Nakamura from Hiroshima University, who will talk about his research and his personal experiences. In order to safeguard the main messages over the past 25 years, resulting from all the interesting and moving stories, and to show that being at peace with the past gives hope for the future, we produced 4 podcasts. I thank Johan Snelle van Vollenhoven and André Schram for their invaluable advice in developing the conceptual framework for the podcast. The podcasts were made by Studio Line 14 and are to be found on our website, LinkedIn and YouTube. I'm happy to welcome some of the interviewed here at the conference, like Aya Isawa and Bert van der Linde. Last but not least, I want to take the opportunity to thank the Ministry of Public Health, Wellbeing and Sport for the generous financial support to our work over the past 9 years. May I now wish you an interesting and fruitful day and hand over to Wemanuhutu, our much appreciated moderator for the day.
Thank you very much, Janneke, for this wonderful introduction. Also reminding every one of us in the room and also those of us who are participating online, welcome to you, a warm welcome to you, that the foundation has been invested in dialogue for 25 years, which is something to be praised and to be respected. As you will know, we have a full program for today. We will have in total 5 speakers in the morning session. The first part of the morning will consist out of 2 speakers first, then a Q&A, after which we will break, and then we will have 3 speakers and a Q&A, and then we will break for lunch. And of course, during lunch, you will have the opportunity to engage in the conversation with one another. And it's always nice to hear yourself in an echo. Well, their names have been mentioned already, but the first 2 speakers in the first part of the morning session will be Professor Nakamura and Dr. Wahid. Let me first start by introducing Professor Taira Nakamura, who teaches Japanese studies and anthropology at the University of Hiroshima. Professor Nakamura will be talking, as Janneke mentioned already, about the effects of Japanese colonization of both Taiwan and Indonesia, and will also focus and talk about transgenerational trauma, making it personal, because he will also talk about the effects of the war on his grandfather, who was a Japanese soldier in the Japanese army, his father, and himself. And he will do so for approximately 25 minutes. So, Professor Nakamura, without further ado, we welcome you, and the floor and our attention are yours.
Nakamura is from Hiroshima University. And he talks about Japanese colonialism and colonialism, the imperial violence in China and Korea. Do you want to listen?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I don't have time.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Can I start now? Hello. Nice to meet you. impossible without learning and unlearning the history and present realities of violence and trauma. So this is today's topic, and there are mainly three subjects here. First, my family's history of war trauma. The second, colonial violence on Taiwanese indigenous peoples, also in and around Indonesia. Let's go to the first part. My grandfather was born in 1914, Tokyo. He was a returned soldier from China's battlefield. He passed away when I was in junior high school. Grandpa served in the war from 1937 to 8. He served in military supplies re- regiment. After suffered, he was sent to Konodai Army Hospital. This hospital is famous for treating war neurosis, the name at that time. But there's no medical record of my grandpa by now, but he has external wounds. He had hate feelings to Japanese society and said, I murdered persons in China's battlefield. He drank too much and removed esophagus by cancer. He had a knife with a 40-centimeter blade in his car. This is my father's memory. Grandpa let reluctant children read testimonial of Veterans Association. He also made an album containing brutal pictures, but this album is lost now. He also said, war is wrong, peace is important. In 1983, he went to China for commemoration tour with comrades, but it does not mean he apologized his sin, I think. I am now thinking through my father's existence, my grandpa dwells in me. My father was born in 1944 Tokyo. He experienced the Tokyo air raid as an infant. He is alive now. My grandpa also dwells in my hardness to live. When I was 6, my parents divorced. I lived with my father. I could not meet my mother for 8 years. Now I feel I'm full of family affair. I'm still anxious for getting yelled, even at this today's presentation by my father. There is presentiment for counter violence to my father. I have self-injury also. I was outraged easily before when someone stood behind me. My friend said I have on and off situation. I also feel my mentality sometimes is stepping on both accelerator and brake at the same time. It seems I'm frigidity and I'm dissociative. Talk meeting of the families who lived with returned Japanese soldiers published this book. This talk meeting is established in 2018, Tokyo.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you.
And family members of returned Japanese soldiers wrote testimony on father or grandfather's violence. Nozaki's father is a medical officer in Troop 731, famous in China. I, as the third generation and also a scholar, contributed an essay for the problem of liberation from war trauma and hardness to live. Basically, I have almost no memories before my parents' divorce at 6. But there's a memory of teaching in childhood. My parents told me to choose one of my parents, and I chose my father. It has been a traumatizing memory for me for a long time. I also have a memory of a phone in a traveling bag, which maybe does not allow my mother to use. I could not meet my mother because my father's opinion and order, and there has been a problem for me, like my mother's presence and absence. It was a failure of narrativization. In 2012, I'm sorry, here. Uh, I wrote about this story using the concept of screen memory by Freud. In 2023, psychiatrist Eugen Ko and clinical psychologist Muramoto told me that it might be happened. Who will get married if it did not happen? About my memory. This message opened my narrativization again. For me, like hanging in the air, but narrativization of my family story continued to today's presentation. My father is eldest, and there's also my uncle and aunt. My father, in youth age, once investigated my grandfather's war responsibility. My grandpa angered my father and chased him with a kitchen knife. I think it was a traumatizing memory for both my father and grandpa. My father once said grandpa forced to write a fancy piece of paper about coal mine dispute. It is not like a proper way for educational concern. My father's school teacher once said, your family's surrounding is worst educational environment. I guess it is also related to Japanese traditional three entertainment district enterprises, including prostitution. My grandpa's educational background is almost elementary school graduated. On the contrary, my father later got a PhD and became a scholar. Once I referred to my uncle and aunt in relation to my grandpa, my father said what they know about my grandfather. From here, I felt my father became a container of grandpa's anger. In other words, it is a maltreatment for my father. My father's education was very severe in my childhood. He said, grit your teeth and try hard. I forced to do rub down with a dry towel in winter. He said, learn when others are playing. My father always stressed anti-regime of Japan. He is a Marxist scholar, having left-wing culture. I'll add here, my aunt abandoned entering university in order to care my grandpa's hospitalization. My father let me study by myself at home very hard. I was forced to explain math proof during his drive, and it is a hellish bad time. I'm afraid of failure or not doing well. I had corporal punishment by my father and nosebleed sometimes. It was educational abuse. I also had chilblain in winter because my father saved heat. It was kind of my father's leftist critique on capitalist society or capitalism. I did not get pocket money from him. I felt hunger in my childhood, and I did shoplifting in my youth age. There's self-selling myself short about lunchbox in school, clothes, etc. My father always recycling things. No television in my house. So it is like I was forced to accompany to resist Japanese capitalist society. My father repeated divorce, remarriage, and move. Gradually, I got numb and insensitive. My father also said he's kind of anthropophobia. He cannot keep long-lasting human relationships. I reached a critical point at high school and entered university in Hokkaido. It's like an escape from my family in Tokyo. I can now say I have been lacking safe space in my childhood. In my family, there has been continued conflict, tension, and shouting. What does using violence and being subjected to violence mean? I think it is just to be invasive. And to invade and being invaded is the same as colonialism. People in such a situation blurs boundary of self and others. It's incapable of respecting personality or confusing distance between persons. I feel I'm inclined to dissociation adding ASD. This feeling led me what Yokomichi says about Tojisha concerned person study of war trauma or autoethnography as I am presenting now. I met Kuroi Akio, Japanese, first about 5 years ago, who is the second generation of returned Japanese soldier, and he is an activist leading PTSD's Japanese soldier and their family's problem. I got courage and I was healed by him too. Post-war Japanese society has changed completely and cooled off toward returned soldiers. It did not cure their war trauma, and this situation bears intergenerational trauma. Talk meeting groups movement makes safe spaces to trauma victims, and this movement makes the problem acknowledgeable and open to the public. It's a problem which has not been talked about as domestic share or family matter. These are Japanese news about returned Japanese soldiers, second generation. Second generation of returned Japanese soldiers starts to talk. Fujioka Michio, her father, returned after an internment in Siberia, Soviet. He drank a lot and did serious DV to children. Fujioka even cheered when her father suicided when she was 9. She now opens talk meetings in Osaka. History and media covering on war trauma in Japan in these 10 years. Please just take a look. Before those, there is almost no concern to this problem in Japan. Returned soldiers' trauma. Because Vietnam War veterans lacked sufficient emotional support from their homeland, many of them were forced to bear the guilt of the entire nation on their own shoulders, and as a result, they were never able to find meaning in life again. Demobilized Japanese soldiers were also treated as those who bore the guilt of the entire nation on their shoulders by post-war Japanese society. The wounds of the returned soldier were never healed, caught in the spiral entanglement of trauma experienced on the battlefield and trauma experienced in post-war Japanese society. Roots of my hardness to leave exists not only in grandpa's war violence. The cause is very much complicated. Grandpa's war violence leads my father's hardness to leave or divorce many times. Leads my hardness to leave. This is a linear understanding, I think, but from spiral causal relationship of trauma, as Matsushima in the article Trauma and Time says, also as a critic on medicalized PTSD concept. My grandpa's anger or trauma got worse because of post-war Japanese society and lack of container of colonial violence. My father, who had bad influence of his father, transformed its violence to his wife and children because a lack of safe space where he can share the family problem. I guess there's also eyes on single parent father family in 90s Japanese society. War responsibility and the implication of war trauma. Post-war Japanese society has been talked as peace or pacifism, but it makes unable to care for returned soldiers and their families. Healing of war trauma of my family and me will be achieved by Japanese society and the governments taking responsibility when we think through the notion of trauma's spiral causality. The notion of trauma's spiral causality suggests that present might be a trigger of trauma or present is stressful situation. Let's go to the second part. It's important to think about the perspectives of chain of colonial violence. Sorry. In my understanding, colonial violence is a condition that enables colonization and colony. It emerges in colonial rule, suppression of unruled, and war. On the contrary, family in modern Japan is set as a unit of state and empire. State and empire's violence is forced to both colony and family. Colo- Colonial violence works in family level as well as states level, also in army, school, company, and some organizations. Bullying is also related, I think. This is my book on Japanese colonialism and Taiwanese Highland indigenous peoples. I did critical study on materials and violent memories among Taiwanese indigenous peoples who experienced Japanese rule in their youth. Taiwan is Taiwan was ceded to Japan after Sino-Japanese War in 1895 through the study of on history of Atayal village in North Highland and fieldwork from the late 90s at Fushin district. I reached below understandings. In that area, there was colonial war and suppression in 1910. Government and rule continues until 1945. From the perspective of colonial violence, A means direct violence, B means assimilating violence of enlightenment, while securing a certain kind of agreement among the colonized people. This B can be also said mild or soft violence, and it included corporal punishment to indigenous peoples or children. Regardless of direct or indirect violence, colonial violence is kind of a force that encloses whole life of indigenous people and reform to new norm or normalization, as Foucault says. This is a picture of Japanese cannon aiming at indigenous villages in 1910s. It's a certification of Japanese colonial violence. The third part, on Japanese military government era, 1942 to 45, including Kratoska, or many studies have been accumulated. The background of Japanese colonial rule is about resource securing and territorial expansion or invasion. As you know very much, there are many problems or issues like Indonesian Romusha and Heiho, internment of Netherlands soldier and civilians, and Japanese army comfort women. In Japanese language publications, camp administrators' violent behavior, and internees' heavy after effects also reported. Internees' after effects can be said as war trauma now. From this slide, we will see 5 more slides, which introduces current Japanese publications on the issue. Nakao's Oral History of War Trauma Memory and Muraoka Sensei's My Via Dolorosa, Visiting Scars of Greater East Asia War in Asia. This is Japanese Association for Prisoners of War recently published the book Encyclopedia of Internment of Soldier and Civilian. Nel van de Graaf and Norwegian Rees Christensen's books. Those are books published and translated by Professor Muraoka. Those are Goto, Kovner, and Van Raalte Heer's books. almost last part, I will add the problem of peace education in Japan, especially in Hiroshima, where I'm now living in. Hiroshima Peace Note, the picture, is a formal textbook which was published by Hiroshima City officially. The problem is it doesn't include the history of Japanese army, colonial rule, and colonial violence of the Japanese empire. It stresses atomic bombing. I can say it is August 6th view of history, and such a historical recognition does not open the way to reconciliation, which our conference talk, talking today. This is conclusion. First, colonial violence perpetrated by Imperial Japan exists, and this violence has manifested as historical trauma across different generations and regions. Reconciliation over the violence of Imperial Japan is impossible without learning the history and present realities of violence and trauma. The last slide is acknowledgements. Thanks for all for listening and sorry for my poor English ability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Nakamura. We had a slight technical problem, but the slides will be shared through the website of the foundation, so everyone present will be able to look closer at your slides. And also thank you very much for your openness and honesty. And please stay with us for the Q&A after the second speaker, who I will now introduce. Dr. Abdul Wahid is the head of the History Department of Gajah Mada University in Yogyakarta. Dr. Wahid, who did his PhD in Utrecht University and has been involved in many collaborative historical research projects internationally, but also with Dutch academic institutions. And his talk will focus on the importance of especially oral history. And obviously, we already heard some parts in the lecture by Professor Nakamura on the importance of oral history when it comes to intergenerational transfer of memory of war within families and communities. And this is based upon research, especially by his history students at UGM. So, good, I guess. Selamat sore, Abdul Wahid. And we're very glad that you can join us. And without further ado, the screen as well as our undivided attention are yours.
Yeah, and please, can you give me a sign when I
Thank you so much.
next slide, please?
Options. I have a slightly problem here. I cannot
Sorry,
see
could you
anything
repeat what you said?
from my screen.
Oh, on the next.
Can you hear my voice then?
Yes, we can.
Is it clear?
Well, if you can increase the volume, because if we do, probably the sound system. Okay.
He
So,
shared at his own.
okay.
You share it now, so
Can I share my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen
Cannot.
now, but your presentation is still not in presenter mode, so we also see the other slides
I
already.
can't hear your voice. I cannot hear your voice.
Oh,
you can't hear your voice. Can you say it again?
yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. And so you can see my share screen now.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, good.
But
So
it's
I can
still,
continue it then.
Abdul Wahid, your screen is
Yeah.
still not in presenter mode, so we see the PowerPoint with all the other slides on the left panel.
So let me try to fix it.
Sure. Oh, sorry.
Is it now?
It's good.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's okay.
All right. So thank you very much, Pak William, for the introductions. And also thanks to organizer, especially Danica, for inviting me to this very esteemed, important meeting. So my name is Abdul Wahid. I'm head of department of history of Gajah Mada University. So what I'm going to do today, I'm trying to share my experience in organizing the oral history class as a kind of project to capture the memory of war and the transfer of memory of war in Indonesian society. So uh, for me or for us, this is a really an important issue, especially because our last project that uh, the overflow project in which UGM was also become part of the project. We regret one thing, namely, uh, we couldn't really deploy oral history as part of our historical process, historical research, because of COVID-19. So for that reasons, actually, since 2018, I tried to conduct oral history research to to capture the memory of war among Indonesian society, especially around Yogyakarta and in Central Java, but also how the memory is transferred within community and families. So I will start with a rather theoretical explanations here. So according to Alistair Thompson's, there are already four transformation of oral history paradigm in the world. The number one is the renaissance of memory as source of ordinary people or people history after the Second World War. And then the second one is the development of positivist approach after 1970s toward memory and subjectivity, which is in a sense, there is a new appreciation toward oral history as also a source of history. Because beforehand, before this period, oral history has been seen as a unreliable sources, and many people, many historians didn't really want to include oral history in their project. The third transformation is the transformation of perception on the role and function of oral history since 1980s, and when memory is gradually used for advocacy and empowerment. And this is really about the intergeneration memory transfer. And then, of course, right now we are in the digital revolutions, which affected the practice of oral history. So we are, I think, in Indonesia, we are still in the third and the fourth transformation of oral history. So that's a kind of big framework for our talk today. But let me also introduce a little bit about the use of oral history in Indonesia and its development among Indonesian historians. So in general, our history in Indonesia is known and widely used as a research method, part of historical method, uh, rather than a genre of itself. So oral history as a field of study of historical genre is still limited. So the development of oral history, it's started more or less in 1970s in Indonesia. But I can tell you, for example, one of the projects initiated by the Indonesian National Army in cooperation with several universities in Indonesia to document the experience and testimonies of national leaders, especially during the independence war. And then from that moment on, there are several similar and other projects initiated at local levels in different institutions and universities, actually to document the revolution at local level. And for example, in my university in the 1990s, there is a large scale of oral history project under the title Social Change in Surakarta 1950s, 1960s. So it's covered the period of late colonial until early independence era. And the focus are very much about the social economic change around the plantation area. And, and that's kind of become really momentous for us to really develop our history as a historical research, but also as a genre of its own. Uh, and then in 1990s, some of you might know that the fall of New Order actually has also stimulated the rise of oral history researchers in Indonesia. There are public discourse on the so-called perurusan sejarah, so the strengthening of history, because it was assumed that during the order there are some, historical manipulations, and this public discourse stimulated the production of oral history works, revealing especially the voice of victims of others' political violence. And that's for the first time actually in this period of time oral history in Indonesia has been used as part of the we can call it perhaps process of historical justice and justice reconciliation and the national national unit of organizations like the Commission for Human Rights and several others from the NGO, for example, they have conducted large scale of oral history to document uh, the voice of the new orders victim, so to say. And now I'm a bit yeah I will also inform you a little bit about how oral history positions in our university. So oral history uh, has been a part of it has been very important part of undergraduate program and curriculum of our undergraduate program in our department. And then the functions still very basic, although it's part of its supervision skill with significant credit. And the main objective of the oral history put in our curriculum is still to give a basic training for a student to do a historical to do a oral history research as part of the historical research method, collect and record individual and collective memory through interview with survivor, historical actor, or witness consider historical event. But in the last 2 or 3 years, or maybe even years, especially after I took over the course, we try to develop oral history not only as a method, research method, but also as a historical construction, as historical genre of its own. So we really require students to produce an oral history project uh, and to produce something out of the historical oral history project that they are conducting. So how the oral history class is organized or conducted in our university. So first, we design oral history as a kind of project-based learning and training and workshop, and then the students they have to have two oral history project as a group and as individuals. So they have to have a two individual project, but also a group project. And since that 2018, the targeted theme and the period that we want to cover is actually the period of 1940s until 1950s. And especially also to respond the impossible, the failure of the Oxford project to include our history in the process. So we really use class and then also what we can the available possibility to include our history to promote our history in our department, in our program. And the objectives are first, student can gain real experience of conducting oral history research individually and as well as collectively. And then to produce oral history document records and oral history works. And then and the third one is to engage directly with intergenerational memory transfer within community, but also family. So the reason behind of this is, I think I also share this with when I was in the launching of the books of the project, the project that we really want to disseminate the product of our research immediately to students. So really like pushing the student and introducing student with the mass current, the mass current research project that we have conducted. So the student really engaged with the process, but also they are really known how to do oral history as part of the uh, research about the period of 1945 and 1949. So now I will try to give you an idea, part of the result of the process. So as I mentioned earlier, that we try to cover the memory transfer within community, but also within families. So basically, within community, we 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 took certain cases from the field and then from the literature. So, for example, this one is we 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 send students to the area of Samigalo. This is the area 25 kilometers westward of upland of Jakarta, where the Indonesian military at the time was hiding during the so-called Dutch counterattack to the TNI in March 1949. And there was in the left side the picture of a monument. Local people call it monument bomb monument, which is uh, constructed actually to remember the Dutch bombing of 7th March of 1949. So the bombing was actually kind of retaliations of the Dutch toward the TNA, the TNI, the Indonesian military general attack on the 1st March of 1949, uh, which is we remember it as Serangan Umum 1 Maret. And then this event is very important on the national memory because the general attack is kind of how you call it, the counter narrative or to counter the claim of the Netherlands at the time to claim that the republic has been taken, has been down because Sukarno and Hatta and other leaders has been captured. So then the TNI tried to prove to the world that Indonesia still exists by launching the attack. So, but the story is all about the people in this locality, in this rural area, because on the 7th of March of 1949, the Dutch launched a bombing of this area uh, on the basis that some intelligence report saying that there are some, local Indonesian, sorry, Indonesian military fighters also, other non-military fighter hiding in the places. So after the attack in Jakarta on the 1st March, they will retreat to the hinterland and to the rural area. So that's why they bombed this area. It was become like a traumatic memory for local people because according to this monument, there are 9 men, of course, 1 woman also killed, and then also served a kid or was killed, and several others injured. But that's quite traumatic because for the first time ever, they really see, like a large scale of military attack uh, came to their places and basically, like destroying their village. So, how this the monument itself is there, but it was like just a monument. Sometimes local people really don't really pay attention about it anymore. But the way of how the local memories try to remember it, it's really part of the 17th August celebration. So local people normally they organize a commemoration ceremony every year of the night of 16th August, known as they call it Malam Tirakatan. So you can see the picture on the right side, the local people gatherings there. It is really like a night to remember the service or sacrifice of heroes or heroines and celebrating independence. And in this very moment, veterans or older people will tell the story about the struggle, glories, but also dramatic stories of the war to younger generations. And for our project, we attended the ceremony, and we really asked local people to tell a story, the elder people in this locality to tell a story about the bombing. And then for many people, for many young generation, they say that, oh no, we know why the monument is there. And part of Loma, they're really proud because their village has been part of the national struggles against the Dutch at the time, but also some other they say that, oh, this is really like traumatic story. This is like a sad story because they lost their relative or something like that. And then we are our student. I also deploy my student to help local community poster enthusiasts. So it's like a local community to run several projects about memorialization, but also publishing local history. Just like the picture. This is the book, Desa Mawa Charita, uh, which is published uh, with the help of our students. So oral history interviews conducted by our students really like with the survivor and witness really brought the memory of the bombing back into life, so to say. It's really become live again, and even during the Malam Tirakatan, some performance was conducted to remember the story of the bombing. So that's a kind of an example of how the memory of war has been transmitted to the real community to the local. Now I move to uh, transfer of memory within families. This this has also become part of the project because during the COVID, the pandemic, student was cannot come to campus, so we do the courses online. And oral history, this is basically is a project-based course, then we switch it into online project. And for that reasons, we suggest students to do a research project in their own family circle. So some of them are interviewing their father, their grandfather, etc., etc. So as a result, actually, it's quite interesting because unlike interviewing with general interviewers, I mean, not family respondent, oral history research with family members are probably much more dramatic than it was expected. So in general, I can summarize from the result project that the memory transfer within families, we can really categorize as follows. So first one, it is really about the memory of happiness and pride because some of the students can really listen to that their grandfathers, grandparents, or maybe their mom sometimes really telling the story about happiness of their family. But also it's about memory of the contribution of their grandparents to certain international events. So the period covered could be like from 1940s until 1990s. So it's good mix everyone. And then the memory of the family struggle for the achievement, of course, and then memory of untold traumatic experience and memory of hidden or secret experience. Some students admitted that through their oral history project, they really experienced kind of transfer of traumatic or hidden memory within their families. So for the first time ever, they listen a story about what's really happening to their grandparent, or they know something really new, which they never known or they never heard before. So they, in that case, for some of them who really like experiencing transfer of traumatic memory, they felt that oral history has been really like a releasing of psychological burden or self-regulations of their parents or grandparents, which makes the story as really interesting. So I will give you some example. Actually, I choose only two of the out of many, because this two is quite recent. So the first one, it's the story, the oral history conducted by Dania. She interviewed her grandmother, Swati Solima, who was born exactly on the 17th August of 1945. So she was still a baby at the time, but she can remember what was happening when she was a kid. So she didn't really expect, I mean, Dania, our student, she didn't really expect that its interview is going to be an unforgettable moment because during the interview, her grandmom was broke to tears and shaking when telling the story about herself and her grandfather during the war. She's still very little at the time, but she can remember. So the setting of the story was the so-called Wonosobo Lautan Api, so the burning of Wonosobo in 12 December 1948 in the wake of Dutch military aggression, the forced actions. That's literature. So the story she told that a group of Dutch troops entered her house and to show her grandfather was forced to kneel with his hand tied at his back, and he rounded up with other men and women in the village. She, as a kid, was terrified at the time and screamed for help, but nobody came. And she was really scared, and she feared that she will lose her grandfather because she lose her own father beforehand. And apparently, her father was the leader of Hezbollah, an Islamic militia group. So she stayed with her grandfather and grandmom because her father and her mother was, was gone. His father was a leader of Hezbollah, was also killed during a war. So luckily, her grandfather was released unharmed and survived, so she continued, live together with her grandfather after the war. But for Kiswati, that event, that experience is really like a daunting or like a traumatic memory. And according to Daniel, my student, she said that uh, she never told the story to her kids, talking even to her mom. And only this interview, she really told the story to her grandfather, her granddaughter, and uh, she told me that when she reviewed her grandmother and her grandmother's like she never when grandmother at that kind of condition before shaking, crying, but then after the interview she looks really relieved. So in that sense, she said that, oh, my grandmom now has passed a very daunting memory to her granddaughter, and granddaughter is a historian to be, so she knows how to deal with that kind of story. So I really suggest her to write something about the what happening in that area during the war, and that's would be hopefully become like her next project for her thesis. And then the second case example, this is it's also very interesting. Muhammad Rizki is my student. Introduced his mom, Mawar Tanaka. As you see for her name, she's actually a Japanese, a Sundanese lady, but she bore the Tanaka as a second name, which is actually come from the name of her father. And to know, and then Muhammad Rizki is now with through this oral history project, really want to know what's actually and who is also Tanaka, actually the grandfather of him. And then she asked her mom to tell a story about his grandfather, which is his name is Video Tanaka. So the story then goes then, according to Rizky, that his grandfather is Zanryusa. So the Japanese who decided to stay in Indonesia after the Second World War. So the story is like this. Hideo Tanaka was born in Taiwan on 16 April 1922. He came to Indonesia as a member of Japanese Imperial Army and deployed in Aceh during the years of occupation of 1942, 1945. Uh, and yeah, shortly he said that after the German surrender in August 1945, Hideo Tanaka deserted from his unit and became a fugitive and hunted down by the Japanese army. And he was helped by local Achenes. And he converted from Buddhism to Islam, married local women, and changed his name to Muhammad Yusuf Tanaka. And then during the Revolutionary War, he joined the Indonesian army, deployed in Division 10 Melabuh Aceh. So he became like a really part of Indonesian army. He was later awarded the Indonesian Veteran of Indonesian Independence War in 1961 with the title Sergeant Major or Major Sergeant. And after the war, he decided to quit his military career and work in oil company to build his own business. Active in Yayasan Warga Persahabatan, this is YWT, a private organization of John Russia, the Japanese who fought in Indonesia during the Indonesian War. So the life story of Gatanaka was never told in his family, and Rizky admitted that only through this oral history project he knows better about the story about his grandfather and why he he used sorry he get the last name of Tanaka as his name also. So there are more actually to tell about the story of these two cases, but I think for the sake of time, I just want to continue with another story about how actually this oral history project has been really developed. So the students also down in the picture on the left side, on the right side, sorry, it's the compilations of oral history transcript. Suara they made it like a bundle. So every years we have like 40 to 50 projects, and then the period it's cover from 1945, 1960 specifically, and students sometimes I think in 2 years in consecutive years they really organize like an exhibitions of their own story products. They convert, they made some of made some poster, as you can see, taken from the story, the oral history project, uh, from the oral interviews into visual things, something like that, that's a poster. But also they made documentary movies, and then some of them who has really like an artistic talent, perhaps they organize like an experimental art, especially CDC installation art, like that. So this is beyond of my imagination before, I have to say. So I really pleased to see it and really see that oral history can be really important in the process of my transfer. I can also tell you more about the story, not only about the war, 1945 and 49, but also about the difficult period of 1965, 1966, for example. There are some students who also have, really good project and then product. And we also put all these works available in our library for research purposes. So I think that's basically what I want to share. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm returning the microphone to Win. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wahid, for a fascinating story, and also it is also very good to see how young students are now engaging in history, oral history, also discovering stories that they did not know about their own families sometimes, and of course, with this last example that you gave, also making the connection to the continuation between World War II, the War of Independence, and later events, and also the very creative manner in which your students are able to present their findings. So that is wonderful. We now have some time for some questions you might want to ask in the audience to both Professor Nakamura or Dr. Vahid. Um, let's do it like this. I'm not sure. Is there a microphone that can be shared to? Oh, that's great. So please identify yourself, just your name, and if you have a question to a particular presenter, so either Professor Nakamura or Dr. Vahid, please make that clear. So the floor is yours, basically. And please raise your hand so the microphone can be brought to you. So who is there?
Can you hear me? Yes? I hope you can. Yes, all right.
So who's? It's always scary, perhaps, to go first, but
Well, thank you very much for nice talk about your history and your background, especially to Nakamura Sensei. I would like to ask something because this kind of story is actually not well known, even in Japan. And I'm very grateful that you shared your history, personal history here. And I wonder, is there any more chances for Japanese to hear your stories?
Mm, how can I say? Many second generation persons of returned Japanese soldier, their hardness to live or kinds of traumatic problems. They now many covered in Japanese news, TVs, documentaries, and news. And for me, about me, I also talk like such a opportunity or in my class or some circles. Yeah, I'm also doing such a activity. And actually, tomorrow in Osaka, there's a meeting of mainly by second generations who will talk their life experiences. I have to attend tomorrow from an early morning. Yeah, is it okay? And we also published some books.
Thank you, Professor. And of course, we're very happy that you are doing this very important work. Is there perhaps another one in the audience who would like to ask a question to one of our two speakers? Or perhaps someone online? Please then you can unmute yourself and if you have a question. But do I see any hands in the room? Ah, I see a hand in the back. Yes.
I have a question also to Nakamura-san. It's a little bit elaborating on the previous question, but I was wondering, you mentioned that Japanese society has recently changed, and you just confirmed that by showing that there is more opportunity for you to share your story. Um, in your presentation, you also mentioned that part of the trauma was caused after the war because returned Japanese soldiers did not meet any listening ear anywhere. Do you feel the Japanese society as a whole, and perhaps also stimulated by government initiatives, is now more receptive to listening to that story and making it part of the curriculum at Japanese schools, perhaps? I would like to understand more about that. Thank you.
Do you mean how Japanese society now are going to listen to war trauma of returned Japanese soldiers and their descendants? Is it right? Um,
Yes, that was the question, Professor. Whether if
yes,
you could talk a little
yes.
bit more about these changes in society.
Uh-huh. As for war traumas problem, Japanese society has changed a little bit in recent 5 or 10 years, but basically Japanese societies, as I showed in the last slide of Hiroshima's peace studies problem, basically Japanese society and government are not uh, are reluctant to face Japanese aggression, um, well, war and colonial responsibility problem. So I'm afraid the talk about PTSD's Japanese returned soldiers, kinds of victimized. I'm afraid of such a problem framing. So I think we I'm not so positive to see Japanese society's slight change. actually not changing on the war crime and war responsibility and even colonial responsibility problem. It's a very big problem. So from this point of view, Japanese society doesn't change a lot.
That makes your work all the more important. Thank you very much. Arigato. Ganbatte kudasai.
There is a word of thanks and underlines the importance of your work against basically, well, the resilience for listening. Any more questions? I, I actually have a question for Dr. Wahid. So you shared very interestingly that your students are engaging in oral history. Do you have the feeling, Wahid, that this is also something that people in other universities and students are doing? Because, of course, we always look at UGM as a pioneer, but are similar things also happening at other universities?
Yeah, thank you, William, for the questions. Actually, next week, I'm going to Malang to attend the workshop of history. So now we have like this how you call it, alliances or network of oral history. Indeed, it's we built the network with with the support of KNTL, okay, but also UGM. But then we include at the time Grace Laksana working at the University of Malang. But then the network is growing now. We include also Satya Wacana University, and we'll also have colleagues from Udayana and also University of Jember. So we are very pleased to see this. Actually, we try to really promote oral history as an important subject, and especially if we talk about the period of 1940s and 1950s and 60s, we are about to lose this generation. So we have to do very, fast. We have to do it quickly as possible to cover or to save, so to say, the memory of those people who are, passing from different areas. So we are trying to reach our colleagues in Sumatra, for example, and then also in maybe other places in Indonesia. But we the workshop that we are going to organize in Malang the second is the second workshop. I think so. So this is the second year, and we are also really thankful for the support of Neon. Also with Evelyn Buchan, was also will be there, but Fredo Stalen, of course. So yeah, I think this. I hope this will be growing bigger and bigger. Uh, and I have to say that actually, as a matter of fact, actually, oral history was a compulsory subject in almost every department of history. But as I said, they stop as method, as like a theoretical thing. We really don't expand it to larger audience. The workshop in Malang will also include teachers from high school. So we will also introduce oral history as a pedagogical instrument to student at the high school. So they will use maybe the type the approach that I took, for example, with the transfer memory within families, for example, which is very interesting, and we can really see it. Maybe that can be also applicable to high school level, for example. So yeah, that's and again, we are trying also to cover as much as possible the topic, including those who are really marginalized in society, like the Chinese, but also those the victim from so to say like the diversity of violence, for example. The problem is we couldn't find any survivor, any longer, which is very difficult to find. I think that's my answer, Rin.
Hopefully you will be able in the near future, sometime to come to the Netherlands and give a workshop to us all. Are there any further? I see a hand there. Yes. Oh, please wait for the microphone because otherwise, yes.
I have a question for both of you. I'm a first generation war child and a psychologist, and I attempted to write my memories down and had a serious problem in finding trustworthy memories. Because all the memories are distorted by stories of other people. And I discovered in my research of my own memories, I discovered I had a war trauma. I never realized I could have a trauma. But I suddenly found out a serious trauma which determined the rest of my whole life. So my question is, do you meet in your research the same problem, the trustworthiness of memories and the secret traumas?
A very important but also complex question. So who would like to go first? Professor Nakamura, Dr. Wahid, who would like to go first in responding to this question?
I'm not sure. Professor Nakamura maybe go first because you talk about your own history, so maybe that's more important. Yeah. If not, then I can answer first. So of course, yeah, that's one of the problems that we encounter in our research. That some people, some respondent or some informants are telling not really the truth, or so to say, or informations that might be misleading or something like that. But we put that as a second priority first, because for us, I think the first important step is to listen to and to collect as many as possible the witness and the interview with that generations, and then we can check later on that sometimes the stories that they tell is not similar, even when we talk about similar events. So they try to maybe give, made up stories, or maybe get more additional stories, but uh, boasting their own role, for example. But that's quite normal. So what the most important thing, we give a voice first. We give a medium first for them to speak and to deliver their memories, which is that's very important. And of course, then the problem of trustworthiness, reliability of information, that's always there. And that's really up to the historian. They have to be careful in writing their own history, and or maybe when using the oral history transcript, for example. So, but we do aware about it. We do aware about it, and but we what we give a priority is actually to listen first, and then collect as many witnesses as possible, and yeah, even in the similar story, in a similar event, for example, people will have different experience. Will have people will tell different story about it, and we can be very critical about it, of course, but we listen first, and then we keep the information first. So later we can really, try to select which one is more reliable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll say something. I'm very much afraid of misunderstanding what the questioner said, and but I'll try to say something. I feel you are talking about memories or traumatic memories, trustworthiness, and that's what I also talked today in my childhood age of my trustworthiness of my memory when I was 6, when my parents divorced and they let me choose the which one you want to live, and I chose my father, and it's after many years I asked them, my father and mother separately. They denied they did such a thing to me. So I was confused. Clearly, I have that scene, that memory in my childhood, but they denied. But some of my friends, psychologists and psychiatrists, says immediately when I said like that, maybe it happened. So that's very much interesting, and I'm still very confused, not so fixed. It's like haunted by memory. That's trauma. That's trauma, and I believe you are also haunted by violent memory or trauma, and that's what we are talking today. Well, many places, also in Japan, and yeah, that's that's what trauma is very much problem for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. And this concludes our the first part of our morning session. So please join me in an applause for Professor Nakamura and Dr. Wahid, who came from us from afar. Thank you so much. So we will now break for approximately 15 minutes, so you can have some fresh air, some coffee, tea, or water, and we will then reconvene for the second part of our morning session. Ja, wie er nu gaat spreken. Ja. Ja. Maar ik weet, ja, dat... ja.
moment dat ik begin.
Hij blijft een beetje hangen. Dus ik moet even een oplossing zoeken. Sorry, wie blijft hangen? Oh, het beeld. De inladen. Kijk, de mensen zijn allemaal nog online. Ja. Maar hij wil de dia niet, de presentatie niet inladen. Okay. Dus ik moet met mijn camera straks even op het scherm, zodat zij mee kunnen kijken. Ja. Ik ben hier weer terug. Ja, ik
Hallo.
even kijken via de hal. Ik denk, moet ik die wand al dichtgooien? Maar je was natuurlijk hier.
Oh, are you one of the speakers?
Yes, I'm about to start. You are also one of the speakers, no?
I'm not next.
No. The program says that Stephanie will start off, and you are.
I'm Melinda.
Yes, you will be after Stephanie.
Okay. On the what Yannick sent to me, I thought it was different. But this is fine.
Well, this is then the schedule that I was given. So.
Yeah.
Some water. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I arrange your water. We will take care of that. No worries.
Dat is goed. En Wim gaat eerst, ja.
Ja. We will make sure that you will have a glass of water. Thank you very much.
Als je over de koek vraagt, kun je verwachten, dit is het boekje, dat ligt achterin.
Ja.
Leef van jou.
Right. Ik ga het nu al doen en ik ga het straks nog een keer doen en als ze dan nog niet weten. Please, if you would be so kind to take your seats so we can continue with the program. In her introduction, Janneke Roos talked about also the educational activities of the foundation, and there are booklets on the table in the back, so please feel free to study them. The booklets are there, and can people take them? Yeah. For free? For free. Just checking. And so, without further ado, we will continue with our wonderful and important morning program, the second session. And I'm not sure whether this was intentional or not. There is a gender divide. We had 2 male speakers, but we will now have 3 wonderful female speakers. And the first, and I'm very happy to be able to introduce her, is Ms. Stephanie Welvaart, who is a researcher at the International Institute for Social History in Amsterdam, an important repository of archives, but also a very strong research institute. And she will talk about the importance of history, but also of storytelling, and the way that storytelling can sometimes be a means, a conduit, so to say, to heal from trauma, so sharing stories. And the title of her presentation is A Story Apart, Reconciliation Through Storytelling. So please join me in welcoming with an applause Ms. Stephanie Welvaart.
Thank you, Wim. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
today I want to speak about reconciliation, and not as something abstract or political, but as something intimate, lived, and intergenerational. Maybe we can go to the slides. I will explain that we have a little problem. So we will see the slides on the screen, and online they will see the slides via a recording of the screen. So I think in that way we will all be able to follow it. Let's go to the next one. Yes. According to the Merriam-Webster website, reconciliation means to restore to friendship or harmony. And if we follow this definition, it doesn't begin with peace treaties or governments. It begins with stories. And it's the stories we tell, but it's also the stories we actually don't tell. And we will explore this through three different interconnected levels. First is reconciliation within ourselves. Second is reconciliation within families. And the third is reconciliation in wider society. And each level requires storytelling, I would say, but not just any story, and I will get back to that point later. Let's go to the next slide. In the past years, I was involved in several research programs in which storytelling took a central place. It was in conducting interviews, so oral history, and also collecting ego documents such as correspondences, diaries, memoirs. But we also looked at how stories are being told and how they are passed through different generations. And I will use some examples today under some pseudonyms from these projects. So just to give you a little bit of an idea where these stories were collected or shared, I will introduce the projects. So one of them is Getuigen en Tijdgenoten, Witnesses and Contemporaries. And it was part of a research program on the Indonesian War of Independence and the violence, Dutch violence in this war. It was conducted by a collective of institutes, and we collected as a sub-project, we collected stories of people who experienced this period themselves. I was also involved in the research project Oorlog en Vrijheid in 3 generaties, so that translates as War and Freedom in 3 generations, by the Nationaal Comité 4 en 5 mei. In this project, multiple generations within families were interviewed about the Second World War, all in the Netherlands. And one project focused specifically on Indonesia, dus the war in Indonesia. And it did cover a longer time period, so it was focused, or it started in the Second World War. But we also realized very soon that that type of frame wasn't really complete for the people who experienced that period. For example, also the National Revolution was very important, or migration and the years in the Netherlands, all connected to the Second World War and going back to general colonialism. And the last project is a research project about dialogue and how grassroots organizations feel about the need to organize dialogue, go into dialogue. And the project followed the recommendations from the report Deel en Verbind. It's from the, I will say it in English, the Committee for Strengthening Knowledge of the History of the Former Dutch Indies. So let's begin at the most personal level. Can you go to the next slide, please? Reconciliation within ourselves. Reconciliation often starts with a moment of emotional confrontation. For example, when someone allows themselves to really feel the story they've long tried to suppress. And I want to share a quote from an interview with Charles, a so-called second generation Malaccan man born in a Malaccan camp in Zeeland a few years after his parents made their way to the Netherlands. And with the risk, a little bit of simplifying his story, just a little bit more context. He, as a child, was raised in that particular camp, and for him it was one big playground. So initially he had very positive feelings about it, but then he soon realized that his parents and other adults in the camp were actually going through very tough times. He himself was raised in quite a strict manner. His father was a military man who valued discipline and order. At age 55, his unspoken anger caught up with him, so he went to therapy. And I will read this quote from an interview we had with him. I wrote it all down, everything that was bothering me, without emotion. I read it again and thought, yeah. So I took it to the psychologist and said, well, I wrote it here, and he opens it, closes it again, gives it back. Go ahead, read it out loud. I said, why? I know what it says. Just try reading it. So I started reading. I was in the middle of a sentence and it started to flow, the tears. Even though when I wrote it down, it was all rational. But the moment he said, now read it out loud, I read the whole story through tears. And then it was done. Then it was over. I could give it a place. So this is reconciliation in a very raw form, I would say. Not just recalling the past, but feeling it and holding it and letting it transform him. And for Charles, this shift opened the door to talking more openly to his family members about his family's past and also about his father and the impact his father had on his life. On the next slide, we see a different form of inner reckoning. It's a testimony of Willem. It's a Dutch conscript born in 1925 in Amsterdam. And he served in North Sumatra during the Indonesian War of Independence. And I will share his quote. We arrived at a kampong and came under fire. We were lying in a trench. The sergeant said, Van Breen, mortar fire. So I went onto the road, crouching, and fired 15 to 20 mortar bombs into the kampong. Later, when we entered the kampong, I saw the effect. They were civilians. As far as they were men, I could be at peace with that. That's guerrilla warfare. But women and children, a mortar bomb doesn't just make a little hole. They were all dead. Well, there was nothing we could do. So in this quote, you see both regret and justification come into play, while he's shifting his responsibility to others, to the orders he got, to the circumstances he was in. So on the one hand, his remorse is deeply felt, so he's really talking about killing civilians, he also is also framed by limits. So at one point, he's talking about that, and on the other hand, he says, but there was nothing we could do. And I think this is where personal reconciliation is very complex, because it really moves between sorrow on the one hand and self-defense on the other. On the next slide, there's a quote from another Dutch veteran, that's Gerrit. So he signed up as one of the first war volunteers. So for him, that's a very important fact, that he was a volunteer. He was eager to go, and as he pointed out himself, at the end of 1945, they arrived in Tanjung Priok, the harbor near Jakarta. And he recalled different moments in which he committed war crimes, and he calls them explicitly war crimes himself. And one of them was in Kampung, close to Purwokerto, where they drove people out of their houses, but didn't actually check if everyone was gone. So then we burned these houses. At the time, it didn't really bother me. It was just another task. But now it's regret and shame. And later in the interview, who knows? Maybe I burned them alive, people. Well, is that a war crime or is that not a war crime? So what stands out here for me is the evolution of feelings over time. So only many years later, he was actually around the age of 80, he started to share his stories and talked about regretting his actions, calling them war crimes. And he did not only speak to his family, but he really felt the need to bring it out there to a larger audience. So that's why he contacted us at the Contemporaries and Witnesses Project to make sure people would hear him. Let's continue to the next level. Reconciliation within families. Abdul Wahid already spoke a little bit about it, or a lot. Families and their stories are where history comes together, very close. But family stories are often incomplete. That's also what came up before. They're distorted by trauma, sometimes by silence or by generational shifts. And I want to show the example of Jos. Jos was born in Malang in 1924 as the sixth of 11 children. And his father was a strict KNIL officer who was gelijkgesteld, but did not hold Dutch citizenship. So both of his parents came from the Minahasa region, and both of Jos's grandfathers had served in the KNIL. So just as a little background, they lived in a neighborhood alongside Indo-Europeans and affluent Indonesians, and there was a separate European district and a kampung where the Indonesians lived, and he, in his own words, said they formed sort of like a buffer. He offers quite a complex reflection on his role during the Second World War. So I quote, "The Japanese were not the enemy for us Indonesians, because they came with the message, we have liberated you from the Europeans, and we are one big family, Greater Asia. At a certain point, I actually felt like a bit of a traitor, because I had also been part of the resistance, even though I was Indonesian. But the doctrine of my father, a KNIL soldier, and the loyalty of my brother to Queen Wilhelmina and the Dutch royal family were so strong, it became something I was obliged to take part in. So as a child of a KNIL soldier, I couldn't say I hadn't done nothing." So this quote shows emotional conflict, conflicting loyalties, and also how social expectations really moved him in a certain direction. And it really tells us something that most history books don't. It's really how people navigate impossible situations in wartime. But what I noticed in that particular research, that this nuance doesn't always survive across generations. So in the next slide, we can see a quote of his son, Karel. So he was interviewed in the same project, and he was given a question what he knew about his father's experiences during the war, and he gave a much simpler account. "My father wasn't enthusiastic about the Indonesian struggle, probably out of self-protection. He was Dutch-oriented because of my mother's family." So that's quite concise. And even though social expectations do come to the fore in his recollection, issues of conflicting loyalties and emotional conflict are shown a lot less, and what is left is just a more tidy explanation of the situation. It's maybe easier to carry, maybe easier to tell other people about, but in a way is emptier in meaning. So by the third generation, we all also interviewed them. In the next slide, you see Jos's granddaughter, Esther, and she's also being asked about what memories she knows or got told by her grandparents. And then she says, "As if it just didn't exist. Maybe it's a very indistinct thing. We simply don't talk about it. So I don't know whether it was traumatic for my grandparents. It just never came up." And this illustrates a wider pattern coming to light in their research, like the deep reflective storytelling of the first generation. It really fades over time, so it really waters down. It becomes more abstract, it becomes fragmented, or even silenced altogether, so memories disappear. And yet, storytelling within families or larger communities, and then I would say not necessarily limited to parents and children and the communication between them, but also looking at larger communities. They do, if you collect in different places, if you hear stories from different people and maybe about the same person, it can work complementary. They do sometimes reveal the complexity of people and their experiences and the situations they were in. In the next slide, we see a quote of Masora. He's a grandson of a respected Malaccan KNIL soldier, as he would say it himself. He shares how his childhood image of his grandfather had changed. "He didn't talk about the killings, but we did find out he was very cruel. I heard from other grandfathers that you had to lick the blood of your parang so you wouldn't fear your enemy. As a kid, though, I thought, wow, what a hero. He told me the softer side of the story, but now I see the harder parts too." So he really, through his family, but not even his family, through his social environment, he heard different stories and really managed to get a more complete image than he got from just listening to his father. So let's now move to the societal level, where reconciliation happens in schools and museums and commemorations. On next slide, you see the quote of Maya, among others, yes. So for many years, reconciliation between the Netherlands and Indonesia and Japan was very much centered on World War II and its aftermath, logically, maybe. But for younger generations, that's no longer enough if they talk about dialogue. As Maya, a young facilitator of dialogue-based events, shared with us, she said, "We've noticed that different generations have different needs when it comes to topics that deserve more attention. Young people, for example, want to place more focus on the pre-colonial period. And I think there's still a lot of processing need for many first generations. And young people are also interested in the lives of their ancestors before the war." In the interview project, it popped up more often that the focus needs to be expanded if it will be up to the next generations, the younger generations. Not only backward to include the whole of colonialism, but also forward to address its ongoing consequences. And as Gina, in the next slide, she's a developer of educational programs, and she stated, "You can explain racism and discrimination very effectively through this history, but that opportunity is not being taken." So there is a call for a broader intersectional memory culture, and one participant urged us to, for example, also reflect on gender roles in colonialism. Another mentioned queerness in the pre-colonial Indonesian archipelago and how colonial rule suppressed it. And another person linked it to climate change and the long history of colonial extraction. So much wider. And as Thomas, brings it actually quite well together. He's an organizer of Second World War commemoration. He shares that, "I hope that's where we're heading, that intersection is the core. All the problems we're facing on Earth, they're all connected, the link between past, present, and future." So this is really a call to transform remembrance and not just revisit the Second World War, but to see if how it's part of a much longer history of domination and displacement and resistance. And you could say then that reconciliation doesn't only mean acknowledgement of what has happened, but more importantly, it means structural awareness that really goes, it really works up until now. So what can we take from all of this? In the next slide, I share my sort of conclusion. So on a personal level, storytelling helps people make sense of trauma. They can come to terms with their action and live more honestly with the past. Within families, it's a way to pass down not just what had happened, but also the emotions, choices, contradictions, and silences that shape those experiences. And for society as a whole, storytelling creates room to move. It creates room to move beyond Second World War focused narratives and opening really the door to a broader and deeper reckoning of colonial history and its ongoing impact. And I guess, you see on the next slide, more importantly, reconciliation depends not just only on telling stories, but it depends on telling the rich kind of stories. And what I mean by that is, it depends on telling stories that are not easy or heroic. Stories that show complexity and contradiction. And stories that include doubt, regret, loyalty struggles, moral uncertainty. And so to be short, stories that are not clean and resolved. And that is precisely why they are so valuable. And I think telling complex stories is not a threat to reconciliation, it's really the very foundation of it. And it really allows us to see not just what happened, so what you could call the facts, but why people did what they did. It's not only showing what was suffered, which is also very, very important, but it also shows what was struggled with. It can help us make sense of and response to actions, or response to the situation in today's world, and really take actions. And I think we are in a world now where we are faced with discrimination, violence, war, and even genocide is ongoing. And I think the power of these stories is to help us deal with what is happening right now. So how to get there? In the next slide, I share some ideas. It's definitely not complete, but just some ideas. I think it's really important to treasure first generation oral history. There's so many rich interviews available, and even if it's not about or from your own family members, it can be so enriching to just hear about what other people went through in the same area, in the same time period, or maybe in a completely different position, opposite position maybe. I also think it's important to being aware of the impact of the context in which a story is shared. So we really noticed that in these interviews that, it does matter a lot who is sitting in front of the person who's sharing a story. So it's an intergenerational thing. Some family members don't want to burden their children or their grandchildren. And also just what is shared with whom, in the sense of sometimes a stranger, as in an interviewer or just a stranger, is more easy to just give your all. And I think it's important to put stories together, and I think a day like this does that really well. And not only putting them side by side and hopping from one to the other, but really trying to make, I say let them talk, but I don't know if that makes sense. It made sense to me, but really try to see where they connect and where they disconnect, to place them in the same moment, for example, or in the same area, or really to try to make a whole. And lastly, make intergenerational talks happen, specifically on subjects like resilience, choice, responsibility, solidarity, and action. And I think different generations can learn a lot from each other, young generations from the experiences of older generations, and older generations from the more modern wisdoms of the younger generation. And then I want to end my talk with a question that you can bring home, or maybe you can bring into the afternoon. What is a story you carry that has no answers, easy answers, or has no simple message? And what would happen if you told it as it really is? And then I was triggered by my own use of really, because we talked about it just before the break, that what is real, if it comes to memories, like is it factual or not? And I think what I actually mean is not what it really is, but more showing the complexity, and in that sense, how make it more truthful. If that is more logic, if that makes more sense. And I think just to come back to the point about the factualness of these oral histories and the issues. Personally, also, like, is my memory actually, is it correct? And also generally, maybe for writing history. I think what stories really do, they can be very useful for writing history and hearing other stories and finding out, okay, so maybe it happened differently, and then you can figure out with different sources, like, okay, so did this happen, did this not happen? But what I think is more interesting, and we really shouldn't forget about that, is that these memories that people have, even if they're not factual or true, they do have an impact on that person's life. And it does have a very big impact too on the next generation. So in that sense, it's always real. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for complicating things and also bringing out this very important intergenerational dimension, the wonderful quotes that undoubtedly resonated with many of us, either out of recognition or because they triggered new questions. And it is very apt that you end with questions, because this is definitely an ongoing conversation. Now, there will be a Q&A after our three speakers have concluded their presentations. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Belinda Bernard, who is an independent scholar, researcher, and writer, and who has recently published I think, again, an important book, A Gate in the Wall, Pacific Wars, POW, Secret Diary, and Family Path, this is my age and my eyesight, towards reconciliation. And I'm very happy that she's here with us. And thank you very much for taking the trouble. Also, there is a glass of water set for you. And please give her a warm welcome, Miss Belinda Weiler.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. And many thanks to Janneke Rose and the Dialogue Steering Committee for this opportunity to speak to you. I want to begin by taking you back to a time 25 years ago when, in August 2000, Wim Lindeyer Jr. stood before the very first conference of this dialogue. At that time, the dialogue Netherlands-Japan. He held in his hands, do we have slides? Oh, he held in his hands this publication of the POW diary of his father, Wim Lindeyer Sr., a World War II prisoner in Japan. Okay. The diary's entries were actually the letters that the senior Lindeyer had never stopped writing, but as a prisoner was never able to mail to his wife and 4 children who were interned in Java. The volume that Wim Jr. held had just been published with the help of Professor Takemitsu Muraoka and actually led to holding the conference. It had been published in Japanese at the urging of the Japanese community in Delft and citizens in Kamaishi, Japan. Only published in Japanese, never in Dutch or any other language. Included with it was the farewell letter that Lindeyer's wife, Nell, had dictated 2 days before her internment camp death. You can see the volume enlarged on the screen before you now, as it was released by a leading Japanese publisher, Misuzu Shobo, in 2000, entitled in translation, Kisses to Nell and the Children from a POW camp in Japan. I first had the opportunity to read the diary in rough English translation in 2003. Japanese media had already featured it in numerous positive reviews. And by 2005, students in Kamaishi, Japan, near the former prison, had read it during a 2-year program in their school. They responded remarkably with a dramatic reenactment, a student play that balanced empathy for Lindeyer and his fellow prisoners with empathy for their own town, which I learned that my country had shelled. What was it, I began wondering, that accounted for the positive attention that this particular POW diary was receiving in Japan in the 21st century? The response seemed counterintuitive. The letter entries recorded traumatic wartime situations. What was it like to be a medic in the midst of gunfire and bombing during the 1942 Dutch defense of Java? What was it like to attempt to minister to the sick and dying in the hold of a hell ship during a months-long journey from Java to Japan? What was it like to survive 3 years in a mining camp in the mountains of northeast Honshu? Above all, what was it like to experience all of this while worried sick about the wife and 4 children left behind? The eldest of Lindeyer's 4 children was 6 years old when he was captured. The youngest was 18 months. What, I wondered, could possibly have been the attraction? It took a long time to find out, but after immersing myself not only in the diary, but then in the records of Lindeyer's fellow prisoners, I think I know. From the very beginning of his imprisonment, Lindayer began developing an entire set of coping techniques that enabled him to work through the trauma he was experiencing and achieve a degree of calm. As a result, he became almost a singular figure in his prison for rationality. First and foremost among these coping techniques was the diary itself. We see his reliance on the diary, perhaps most dramatically during his transport to Japan. Imagine him crammed along with 1,200 other POWs like cargo into an old troop transport with 1,000 returning Japanese troops. The POWs lie virtually on top of one another in tiers of shelves in the ship's suffocating holds, barely enough room to sit up. The 500 in Lindayer's group have to climb a 40-foot ladder up the hatch of their hold to reach WCs hanging over the edge of their ship. Their food, insufficient, is lowered in buckets through the same hatch. Well, it's marked. It's not till slide 3. Don't you have the script? You're on the top of page 3.
All right. I'm there.
Yeah, and you'll have to wait a while. Just leave that there for a while. Okay. Remarkably, we're in the hold of the ship, remember? Remarkably, in the hold's faint lighting, he addresses letter entries to his family. The very act of writing distances him from the circumstances he's writing about, allowing him to evaluate his situation more calmly. Mentally, he's in their living room, telling them factually, so as not to alarm them, what he's experiencing. In doing so, he achieves a more factual, rational grasp of his situation himself. Rhetorically, he's assuring the family that despite being carried far away, he's maintaining the identity that he's always had with them. He continues to be their husband and father. From the depths of the ship, he expresses hope that Herman, his next eldest, is still going to preschool. He wonders how Vim Jr. is doing in 2nd grade. And he tells Nell that he has every confidence that she will get through this, signing his entries, kisses from father and Vim, kisses from father and husband, your loving Vim. In fact, his rhetorical device is an effective coping mechanism. In reassuring them, he's strengthening his own belief that despite his loss of freedom, he remains himself. But Lindayer is not only determined to retain his family role, his entries likewise show his determination to hold on to his identity as a highly educated scientist with a passion for learning and teaching. Even prior to the transport, as a POW in Java and no longer able to communicate with his family, he reports a host of educational activities. He has found someone to teach him Latin. When possible, he's giving lectures to his fellow POWs on topics like the forces between small particles. He's learning Japanese. For some POWs, this is a disloyal activity. For Lindayer, the scientist, it's knowledge that can help him with rational grasp of his situation. Once at the camp in Japan, Lindayer records sadness over the 30 prisoners who died on the ship. This is mingled with fear over the cases of dysentery, pneumonia, and even diphtheria in the present. He himself nearly dies, yet within a short time, he's keeping up his educational activities, learning the Japanese characters for writing, and writing a basic chemistry course in English after first finding someone who can help him practice that language. He's also showing his family's photograph. Cue Thank you. So he's showing his family's photograph to any patient who is well enough to talk. I just have to interject here. During my visit a few years ago to a former sailor of the USS Houston, I had carried the volume of the Japanese version of the diary with me. Jack Felice pointed across the room to the volume and said, "I think I've seen that picture before." By the one-year anniversary of his imprisonment, the balance that Lindayer has achieved leads to an important change. His diary up to now has been an escape hatch of sorts from a squalid present to the safe haven of pages where it's as though he's at home with his family, telling them bits and pieces of his experience. For his anniversary entry, he resolves to make the door on the hatch swing the other way. Rather than retreating to the past, he'll bring the family fully into his present by relating his experience during an entire single day. The day he describes includes everything, down to the earthy details of his helping a bedridden patient occupy his throne, so to speak, as various sounds are produced. Not coincidentally, within the single day entry, we find that overnight and almost without realizing it, Lindayer has taken on a new camp identity. His new group of British and American friends have seen fit to rename him Lindy. "Lindy, give me the pan, please," he quotes the bedridden British prisoner as saying, and then, "Take me off, Lindy." From the start, the name implies familiarity, a tendency of the English speakers to identify him, to associate him with aspects of their own experience. Lucky Lindy and the Lindy Hop. Now, just an aside here. When I visited the former prisoner, Jack Felice, he did not remember anybody named Lindayer, but he instantly remembered Lindy. "He sewed up my foot once." From the date of the single day onward, Lindayer is no longer finding it necessary to root himself so entirely within the confines of the diary. By bringing the family, even rhetorically, into his everyday, and by accepting his new name, he's effectively coming to terms with this camp situation. Without diminishing his identity as Vim, he is finding that he can also be Lindy. The records of Lindayer's colleagues show him embarking on a new and expanded role in the prison at this point. His coping skills now allow him to be fully integrated with the present. Americans James Reynolds and Bill Stewart, sailors off the Houston, cite Lindy's bringing uplift to sick prisoners, sharing food, solving problems, and managing to resolve disputes. Keith Edmonds of the Royal Australian Air Force tells of Lindy's teaching algebra. Kenneth Horne of the British Royal Air Force of his teaching a differential and integral calculus course that he has written himself. He's also teaching young Japanese math. Note what is happening here. Lindayer's educational activities are beneficial not only to himself, they provide moments of calm rationality to his fellow prisoners as well. More than this, he as teacher and they as students are likely elevating their professional prospects for after the war. This gives them an additional and valuable coping capability, hope. But even more than the new name, I think I need some water here. There's no ledge there. But even more than the new name, Lindayer's single day introduces a new and unexpected figure, a civilian Japanese camp employee, precisely at the day's center. This civilian employee, Iroe Iwashita, is an aspiring novelist with a degree in English, but he's had to put his aspirations aside for his wartime assignment as the liaison between the camp's prisoners and its administration. He stops in often at the camp's hospital to practice his English and French with Lindayer and a fellow medic. That fellow medic has some relatives sitting in the back. For Lindayer, the liaison situation resonates. Iwashita's life, like his own, has been turned on end. And though he spends most of his time at the camp, he has a wife and 2 children and a home in Tokyo. Recognition of mutual concerns stimulates empathy and middle ground between the 2 men. When Lindayer is asked by camp officials to write about his experience during the war, including his worst experience, evidence suggests that Iwashita meets with him afterwards for a personal conversation about it. And when Lindayer is transferred from the hospital to the camp's electrical workshop, the liaison stops in there as well. In the workshop's greater seclusion, Iwashita, Lindayer, and a handful of others engage in something very like dialogue. Though consistently loyal to his country, Iwashita has become critical of its militarized government. If they could read my thoughts, I would be executed. From Lindayer's colleagues, we gain the sense of his being an influencer, held in certain regard, even by the camp's administration. Reporting an episode in which most would have been punished, Lindayer is merely chided. His fellow colleagues consider it Lindy's luck. But far more than from luck, his role as influencer arises from coping skills that allow him sufficient calm to have empathy when appropriate for Iwashita and others. Lindayer wasn't alone in this, of course. There were other POWs who saw shades of gray, who noted good guards, and even hated to see ones they liked sent off to the war. But in his diary, Lindayer is consistent in building on empathy and mutual concerns to suspend judgment and listen for a while. He recognizes that Iwashita does not see the world through the same lens that he does, but he is hardly the other. He is someone whose otherness can be respected and whose photograph deserves to be stored in the diary next to the photograph of Lindayer's family. And it's right here that we arrive at the transgenerational influence in the diary. It's important to note that the senior Lindayer experienced his trauma as an adult in real-world situations, whereas his eldest son, Vim Jr., experienced his trauma as a child and internalized it in a way that was inexpressible. But we will see that he found ways to begin to decipher it. Vim Jr., I'll call him Vim, grew to adulthood in the Netherlands and became a civil engineer with a PhD posted to water and sanitation projects in undeveloped countries. Reading the diary briefly as a teenager, he had discovered the photograph of a Japanese man in what looked to be army clothes, next to that of himself and his mother and siblings, and he found it disturbing. But his father had told him to put the diary aside until later, and over the years it had just settled into the back of his mind. Until 1992, that is, when a tragic event, the murder of 14 of his aid worker acquaintances, were murdered at the Khyber Pass. This caused him to suffer a breakdown. The event was devastating in itself, but it brought back the traumatic memory of attacks at another pass long ago, when the Allied truck convoy liberating him and his siblings met the fire of Indonesian independence fighters. The real subject of his breakdown was Central Java in 1945, not Pakistan in 1992. Rereading the diary in hopes of learning his father's coping strategies seemed the only possible therapy. He began putting the letters on an old secondhand computer. Yet his work with the diary caused flashbacks to the events of his childhood. Reliving them made him feel uncertain and caused trembling all over his body. In the psychiatrist's terms, this was his traumatic affect, in which the initial numbing experience that caused the trauma has never been fully processed rationally. And because of that, it repeatedly and insistently comes back. But Wim continued to believe that examining his memories in light of his father's diary would surely help. His father had expressed well wishes for his family while in the company of dying men in a derelict ship. The very act of writing might have held terror at length to allow him to think more objectively and do what he could to improve things. Later, when asked by the camp's administration to report on his worst wartime experience, he managed to do so in a rational and controlled voice that they could understand. The task that Wim set for himself, reading his father's letters and putting them on a computer, might work in a similar way. Confronting his own experience within the larger framework of his father's document might help with the distance and objectivity that he himself needed. The diary's factual approach stimulated him to search for facts and data of his own. He began attending the camp reunions that sprang up in the 1980s in the Netherlands. The reunions provided an opportunity that was otherwise missing for former internees to compare notes and exchange information. Wim pored over the reunion tables full of diaries, maps, and photos, finding it strangely exciting to get a clearer adult access to the events of his childhood. But a particular memory of his mother's last words in a camp when he was 9 gave him great difficulty. Distraught over her final illness, he had vowed that he would fight the Japanese for her when he grew up. She drew herself up on her sickbed and gasped, "No, that was the last thing he should do. Hatred was what caused war. With hatred, he would never be able to love." Nonetheless, he had never been able to separate his grief over her from his bitterness toward the Japanese and his bitterness toward himself. Had he helped her more in the camp, would she have lived? Whoops. The same conflict held him captive as an adult. He found that it only became worse as he moved forward in the diary to his father's letter of the single day. The single day would almost certainly have been a composite of many days. How could it be that his father had positioned a visit from one of his captors prominently at the center? The letter suggested that his father had developed a close relationship with this man, no doubt the same whose photograph perplexed him as a young teenager. Wim's long-held notion of the Japanese as the monstrous other of his nightmares was being challenged. But he was bothered by another memory as well, a remarkable premonitory dream that he had in his first camp as a child. In the dream, he and his siblings were guided by an unknown lady through a gate into a courtyard of fountains and flowers. He had been troubled by the dream's conflicting suggestions of an escape. That would be the apparent security of the garden and the guiding figure of the lady, and its also suggestion of a trap. That would be the ominous absence of his mother. But his mother had told him not to worry, it was only a dream. It's just that it proved to be more than that. In the dream, the courtyard was surrounded by a massive building built against a slope, with outdoor staircases interrupted by terraces on either side. He had felt compelled to explore and had run up along the staircases to a terrace with a pool of goldfish and water lilies. Lying on his stomach, he stared, mesmerized by the fish. Then, continuing on, he passed through a doorway into a garden and via another door through a wall. On the other side, he was delighted to find that he could jump down to a nearly dry stream bed and follow it around all the way to the gate where he had entered and joined the others. Then the dream ended, preventing him from seeing more. He had forgotten such things by late May 1945, when they were transferred to the 3rd camp, Muntalan. His mother was already ill and had to be carried aboard the train on a stretcher. He and his siblings traveled with a friend, Mrs. Marine, and arrived at the camp ahead of her. The camp was an enormous Roman Catholic seminary built out of stone against a lower slope of Mount Merapi. In spite of his overcrowded conditions, he had been struck as they entered the main gate by the existence of a garden and ran exhilarated up a series of stairs in search of more such oases. Coming upon an old swimming pool, he lay on his stomach, watching orange carp swim under plant debris. And only when he heard a pursuing guard did he recall, just in time, that he needed to run to the right, through a doorway, into a garden, to another door, through a wall. Over the years, he had asked himself whether the parallel of dream and experience was no more than a bizarre set of coincidences. Yet the dream continued its hold on him and was clearly a part of his traumatic effect, as evidenced by his having returned to it often during the family's post-war sharing. More fact-seeking proved crucial to his process of deciphering it. In early 1995, he attended a speech about the Battle of Ambarawa by a Dutch military historian, Petra Groen. Wim hoped it would provide a more accurate understanding of the chaotic period of the liberation of the camps and his own experience as the truck convoy carrying him and his siblings headed for the harbor in Semarang through the Gumbel Pass. What he was astonished to learn about was the remarkable heroism of a certain Japanese major, Kido Shinichiro. For 5 days in October 1945, Major Kido had led his unit in heavy fighting to put an end to the violent attacks on the former civilian internees by Indonesian insurgents and to regain control of Semarang and the Ambarawa camps. His efforts saved thousands of European lives at the cost of 200 Japanese lives. Wim was struck with the realization that hundreds of Japanese, the same people he had held responsible for his mother's death, had died fighting to save me. His concept of the Japanese as the evil pursuing other of his nightmares, first challenged by his father's friendship with Iwashita, was no longer tenable. Yet even now, he had not thoroughly grasped the dream. A question raised by a friend upon hearing it once again helped him decipher it. Had he seen any connection between the three worlds print that he'd never failed to mention seeing at the psychiatrist's office and the fish of the camp and the dream? Did I cover the three worlds print? I think I was supposed to. There it is. Wim was stunned, saying that he had never consciously analyzed the print, yet the possible subconscious associations left him speechless. Escher had his own traumatic memories of the war Wim knew. Perhaps as a result, Escher had worked through the perceptual problems that accompany the binary concept of an other in the Three Worlds print. That the large fish with bulging eyes was somewhere in his awareness when he learned about Major Kiddo made sense to Wim. The fish surely represented one world, and the trees another, but what was the third? The leaves floating on the water's surface, barely existent middle territory? In relation to Major Kiddo's story, the three worlds might have been the Japanese, Wim himself, and the Ambarawa area of the camps where the Major took risks in his behalf. Wim began to consider whether Escher's treatment of perceptual problems might shed light on the premonitory dream and the related events at Muntalan. The stairways and terraces that he had navigated to circle the camp stone structure resembled the eerie architecture of another of Escher's prints, titled Ascending and Descending. In this print, monks climb up and down a series of staircases in a closed system. Wim's own route in the dream and in reality consisted of the same continuous loop. Running from the guard had seemed an escape, his hope as a child for a happy ending. It had actually prevented him from coming to terms with his own trauma and repeatedly brought him back to his own bitter hatred. Now, in an intuitive leap, Wim realized that in the symbolic terms of the dream, he had to turn and face the pursuing other. To find a true gate through the wall, he had to go to Japan. He had to engage the Japanese. And as fitting, during his first 1995 trip to Kamaishi, Japan, his father's diary traveled with him, held close like a suit of armor. Yet when a reporter asked what was in the bag, Wim found himself opening it almost without thought and revealing the diary's pages to the reporter. In the days that followed, he toured the former camp and the mine. Once again, he was revisiting his father's experience, but this time he was discussing it with Kamaishi citizens in the present. The following year, before a student audience in Kamaishi, he confessed the hatred he had had for them as a result of his mother's death. And then he asked their forgiveness. In a rational manner they could understand, he conveyed both his anguish over her loss and his desire to reach out to them. From what I've said about citizens in Kamaishi pressing for the publication of the diary in Japanese, you effectively know the rest. They had their own trauma because of their city's bombardment. Yet out of empathy, they took Wim's lead in seeking accurate historical understanding of their past. Their efforts to gain access to the diary were influential in the establishment of this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very reflexive and deep reading of this extraordinary diary and the life story, basically, of both father and son and their journey towards reconciliation, so to say. Without further ado, because we are a bit behind when it comes to our time schedule, but content always takes precedence over time, I always say. I would like to introduce Dr. Ernestine Huge, who is a biographer, a writer, translator, and editor. And Dr. Huge has analyzed the culture of a network of remembrance of the Kaimoka POW camp in Japan. So the survivors and how this network also works towards reconciliation. So coming back to Stephanie's lecture, we are navigating between these different levels of basically memories and operating memories. So Ernestine, the floor is yours. Yes.
Can you, yes, start it from the beginning. Can you do spill off? That we have the whole screen, do you know what I mean? Yes, thank you, great. And there's a lot of changes, so I'm going to annoy you by the time I've finished. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Wim and Janneke and the whole committee for inviting me to speak today. It's a great honor. I've given this presentation the name Moving Forward from the Network of Remembering of Kamioka POW Camp, but perhaps a better title would have been Looking Forward or Looking to the Future from Within the Network of Remembering of Kamioka POW Camp. And the main question that I will address in this talk is it possible to not forget the past, yet at the same time to look forward towards the future, to make a conscious effort to open our vision to the future as we remember the past? And in the margin, I will perhaps also touch on the unclear boundaries between aggressor, victim, guilt, pain, suffered, pain inflicted, which has come to the fore in all the other presentations and which is a difficult subject. Perhaps it will feature in the margin. Please, the first, next slide. I would like to first take you back to the past in order to be able to look at the future towards the end of the presentation. And I would like to take you to this location on Honshu Island in Japan. The red dot, it's to the north of Takayama, and it's 1,600 meters up in the mountains. And this is the site of the next slide, please, of this particular camp. This is a sketch made by one of the former POWs, a Dutch POW called Ben Ruffan. Kamioka POW camp, it's had many names: Osaka, Kamioka branch camp, Osaka 7B, Nagoya 1B, doesn't matter. I would just refer to it as Kamioka, which is what the POWs also use as the name. Very briefly, opened in December 42, liberated in 45, 335 Dutch and Indo-European POWs were held here, 6 English or British POWs, 350 men from the United States. And all these men worked in the lead and the zinc mine. That was the reason for this camp. It was a labor camp to provide lead for the batteries, etc., of submarines. And a total of 85 men were eventually to die, which is 14% of the camp population. Now, my interest in this camp arose from research I was doing for a biography on one of the former inmates, a lawyer who was eventually involved in the Jungschläger-Schmidt trials in the 1950s in Indonesia, well-known political trials. And I later found out that the youngest brother of my grandmother was actually also interned in this camp, but I didn't know that at the time that I visited it. Next slide, please, another tap. To look at everything that I collected during this research for this biography, all about this Kamioka camp, which touched me in some profound way, I found it really useful to look at the work of Pierre Nora. First of all, memory is not the same as history. History is a reconstruction. This is what I did in the biography. I reconstructed events in the camp. It is the reconstruction of what is no longer. It's a representation of the past. It's an intellectual process. It's secular. It's about analysis. It's about criticism. It's about examining sources, checking facts. And it lays a claim to universal authority. It's literal and it's rational. Memory, on the other hand, is life. It's something you experience in your body. It seems like a mental process, but memory also
has smells, images, sounds. Memory can be triggered by smells, by images, by sounds. And it's also open to remembering and forgetting and change. It's vulnerable to manipulation and appropriation. It can lie long dormant, we heard that in Melinda's story, and then be periodically revived. So it's a very different phenomenon, and it's a bond tying us to the eternal present. Now, I'm particularly interested in where can we find these memories? What triggers these memories? Where can we meet? And that's in the concept that Nora has described, sites of memory, or lieux de mémoire. I'm no expert on memory, that's Stephanie, so I'll just touch on it briefly, but I find this very helpful. This is spaces, it's objects, it's rituals, commemoration activities are sites of memory, where memories come to the fore, are worked through, are perhaps changed, are practiced, and they can be material or non-material, even symbolic. And I will give examples of sites of memory of this particular camp that I'm so interested in as we go along. Next one, please. What I also find very helpful is this work by Kyoko Murakami and David Middleton on networks of remembering. And very briefly, they too say that society is not just an interaction between humans, but it's also humans and the non-material world, different objects. It's hybrid. And I find this particularly useful in trying to sort through all the elements of a network of remembrance around a particular camp. It's not just physical sites, it's also practices, and the whole thing together is alive, can change. You can bring it together, you can choose, you can filter, you can leave behind, and you can move on. So these are the two terms that I've been working with in some of the publications I've written on Kamioka. Next one, please. Here is a picture at Liberation in 45. Note the stone parapet on which the barracks are placed. And in the next picture, this is a sketch of what the camp layout looked like, just to give a brief impression. And next one, please. This is what the camp looked like when I visited it on 11th April 2016. Note the stone parapet. So the barracks are gone, but the place is still, it resounds. When you stand there and you're familiar with all the diaries and the books and the histories and the memories people have talked about, and you stand there, then this is such a potent site of memory. The whole area, actually, the mountains, the sky, the POWs write in their diaries about the sky and the mountains and the colors and the seasons, and when you stand there, you can actually see and feel it. And of course, it was cherry blossom time when I was there in April, so it was absolutely mesmerizing. Next slide, please. So, sites of memory, physical sites, obviously. If you can just touch them as I go along. The former campsite, I've just shown you that. You can see along a path an entrance to a mine where the men had to work. That evokes all kinds of associations and memories. There's the house of one of the former guards, which I was allowed to visit with the people who traveled with me, where prisoners were taken and actually fed and allowed to rest under the guise of being put to work. There's a farm where they went to do reclamation work, where they were also allowed to rest and eat. And very potent sites of memory are, of course, cemeteries. And if you click on the next one, this is Menteng Pulo in Jakarta, in Indonesia. This is where the Dutch POWs who died in Kamioka, their ashes are interred. The British men who died in Kamioka, their ashes are in Yokohama. And the American ashes were taken back to the US after the war, so they are dispersed across America. It gives an impression of how broad this network of remembrance can be, how far you have to go to put it all together. Next picture, please. This is another site of memory, not far from the camp, and this is a special site, I think, because the POWs also were familiar with this temple site and write about it in their diaries. It's a small 400-year-old complex. The present building is 100 years old. And you can see a cenotaph, the tall needle on the right of the center was actually erected by a local Japanese man. And on it, it says, "Cenotaph for the martyrs of the Kamioka Prisoner of War Detachment." So this was a Japanese man honoring the POWs who died. This is not a Dutch, American, English, or European initiative. It's a local initiative. And on it, there's also a Buddhist philosophy that says that all those who have fallen in war, regardless of whose side they are on, are to be remembered. So this cenotaph stands for a recognition of a shared wartime experience of loss and grief. On the next slide, you can see another fascinating thing, and that's what I call a Book of the Names of the Dead. This is in a box in the temple of the ground I just showed you. And this again was produced by a local Japanese citizen. And in it, he wrote the names of every single known local soldier who died in the wars after Japan's Meiji Restoration in 1868. And he also, in the next slide, included one back, please, just one back. One more. That's an appendix with all the names of the POWs, so the American and European POWs who died in the camp. Again, the initiative of this man, he himself inscribed all these names secretly from the death certificates. I find these fascinating sites of memory, and on the next page you can see where all the local Japanese soldiers since 1868 died. And well, this was so astonishing when this was opened as I visited that site. On the next site, my personal fascination is always with diaries. That was my original research interest. I won't go into them, but there are 6 known diaries and journals to have survived from Kamioka, 4 Dutch, an English, and an American one. And they are what Philippe Lejeune would call crisis diaries, and Melinda's already talked a lot about the value of diaries and what they can do and how they help you to get through the experience. On the next slide, I've listed a few other sites of memory, memoirs. I'm very interested in dedicated websites. If you visit the Menteng Pulo site, so the cemetery in Jakarta, digitally online of the Oorlogsgraven Stichting, you can search on individual names and try searching for Verstift. And then you can click on a complete virtual environment dedicated to this Mr. Verstift who died in Kamioka. And it opens up a whole vista of information, of personal details, but the history of Indonesia, of Indo-Europeans, of the War of Independence. It's absolutely fascinating, and it's a new development, I think, that we have access to these types of remembering, all elements, I think, of the network of remembrance. And all these activities and memories are bound together by narratives, by storytelling, commemorative ceremonies, reconciliation trips, and all together they form, in my opinion, the network of remembering. But also, a dialogue like this organization is a site of memory. We come together to remember, to process, to talk, to discuss, to look forward. It's very poignant. It's not just the factual, physical things, it's also the activities that we do together with others. On the next slide, briefly, this was the first reconciliation trip to Kamioka. In 1955 already, a Dutchman traveled to Kamioka to talk with the former translator, with camp guards. A lot of people were still alive at the time. And he wrote that he felt much better after the trip. And I must say that the same effect was voiced by another POW, Bob Vogler. That's quite a well-known name in some circles, a very well-known American who went to Kamioka several times. And on the next slide, you can see that this is again at the Kamioka site. Recognize the stone parapet. For me also, it was an unusual experience and a very healing experience, but I wasn't there alone, and I think that is the essence. I was there with Fuyoko Nishisato of the POW, Japan POW Research Network, and Mr. and Mrs. Okada and his father was one of the former camp guards of Kamioka. And it's these meetings, I think, that are key to looking forward. In the next picture, one more picture of Mr. Sato, someone I met there as well. And this made me so interested in what actually happens during these reconciliation trips. Why do we feel better? What does it do? Does it really rewrite memories? I'm not sure. Marukami and Middleton say that what a reconciliation trip does, it changes actions and thoughts. It ties people to circumstances, past and present, materiality and morality, and it changes fixed patterns of behaviors. So where perhaps you would have regarded a Japanese person as someone to be feared, that will change through your reconciliation trip. I think it's a slightly different process. I think we actually put a new layer on top of earlier memories. I think we color earlier memories, we nuance them, we tweak them, but memories are imprinted in your system, and it's very difficult to just change them. So I think it's an ongoing process, and I think you need to meet with other people with a vested interest in moving forward. Most of all, I think it's these personal, physical encounters with others with different perspectives, different roles. This has been discussed in the earlier presentations, even from different sides, that bridge the gap, and we need to recognize each other's pain and guilt in these shared memories and create, well, a space in the present, really. Create a new site of memory where this meeting took place. And I think on the basis of that, you can turn your view to the future. There are, of course, challenges. If we go to the last slide, because I would highly recommend working through a whole network of remembrance for a particular situation or a camp or an interest you may have over a country. But of course, you need to travel. And it's a long way, and it's expensive, and it's difficult, and you need the time, the preparation, and the resources. There are physical and psychological challenges to making these long, arduous trips, certainly if you then have to travel all the way up into the mountains to 1,600 meters and you're unclear where you are. I think really languages are still a problem. It's tempting to think that deep L and AI solve all our problems. They don't. You still don't understand what is really being said. You don't understand the culture. You don't understand the way of saying things. So I do think this is still a huge challenge. Language. Please, let's not cancel all our language courses, as the universities are doing. And finally, I think it requires ongoing engagement with sites of memory. It is not a quick fix. I haven't myself experienced that going to see certain sites, and my family's history is steeped in living in pre-war Indonesia, internment, war of independence, being interned in Japan. It's not a case of just going there and then all will be well and all your memories are fixed. You have to keep working at it. You have to keep meeting people. And I think, therefore, that is so important about this particular organization. We need to keep coming together and meeting and talking and looking to the future. This is a site of memory, and we need it to keep working on dealing with whatever memories we have. There will always be work to be done, so please, dialogue, do not stop trialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernestine, for a wonderful and also important presentation where you point out the importance of sites, physical but also mental sites of memory, the importance of networks, of meeting together, also the importance of moving and forward, and that it is a process that comes with challenges, which is important to understand that going to a place, entering into conversation, often does not offer a very easy solution, obviously. Moving forward for our morning program, there is space for some questions, but I also want to not keep you too long from the lunch. So please, if you have questions, perhaps there are questions that you would like to bring into the dialogue sessions. There is ample opportunity to do so. But if you have any questions for one of our three wonderful speakers, please raise your hand. The microphone will come to you, and they are with us in the room. And so if there is anyone. Mevrouw van Raalte, you, yeah.
Well, we are starting a film, and we have a very good producer, Hans de Weers, and I think I'm going to tell it in Dutch. I have written down. Here is the.
Maybe you can zoom in. Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to tell it in Dutch. The Last Dance on Java. De laatste dans op Java is een speelfilm over het dramatische verhaal van twee vrouwen, de Nederlandse Helen en de Indonesische Tita, op het scharnierpunt van de koloniale geschiedenis. De even turbulente als sinistere periode tijdens kort na de Tweede Wereldoorlog in voormalig Nederlands-Indië. Beide vrouwen worden geconfronteerd met politieke omwentelingen die hen dwingen hartverscheurende keuzes te maken. Een film die een breed publiek zal aanspreken over een belangrijke en tot nog toe onderbelichte periode van onze vaderlandse geschiedenis. Dat Hans de Weers van VAT Productions, een van Nederlands veelzijdige producenten en zeker één van de meest succesvolle. Hij heeft dus onder andere de film gemaakt De beste vriendin van Anne Frank. Zijn eerste speelfilm Antonia won hij de Oscar voor de beste buitenlandse film. Scenario's geschreven door Kees van Wijnen, die vele prijzen heeft gewonnen en voor het Tokyo Tribunaal genomineerd is met de Emmy Award. De laatste dans op Java zal de grote Nederlandse film worden. Zal de eerste grote Nederlandse film worden over de Tweede Wereldoorlog en de daaropvolgende veranderingen. Wij zoeken sponsors. We hebben sponsors gevraagd.
Dat is uw vraag.
En dat is de vraag.
Oké, dank u wel.
Well, basically, thank you, mevrouw van Raalte. This is a pitch for an upcoming, well, movie. And obviously, if you want to engage in a conversation with mevrouw van Raalte, please approach her. There is a question, though. Yes?
Well, it's not a question.
Oh.
But I think it's worthwhile to learn where, as the Mrs. Wim Lindeyer here, and grandchild of Wim Lindeyer. And that's what the generation we can carry on. And I think it was important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this edition. Thank you. Any questions, if I may? Are there any questions, or is everybody pining for lunch, which is totally understandable? Going once? Twice? Perhaps we can. Oh, yes. Thank you. Oh.
Kan niet zo goed staan, want maar
Houdt u mij maar vast.
Ja, dat denk ik goed. Ik vraag mij af hoeveel van u allen na de kampperiode weer terug moesten naar Indonesië voor de Bersia-periode. Want talloze mensen die hadden een functie, door
gehad bij de KPN, bij scheepvaartmaatschappijen, bij industrie en handel. Ja, die moesten terug, want anders konden ze niet in Nederland hun pensioen krijgen. Er wordt nooit in deze groepboelans gesproken over dat soort mensen. Hoe zwaar die het hebben gehad, zo uit de kampen, even naar Holland 3 maanden en direct weer de berceerp in.
Misschien is dat een goede vraag voor in de middagsessies. Want, want dit is meer een gelegenheid om de 3 sprekers een vraag te stellen. Maar straks kan die vraag gesteld worden. U had een vraag.
Ja.
Mijn vader werd afgekeurd.
Ja, ik hou hem vast.
Ja.
Yes. Let's continue. Yes,
Ja,
you have a question.
Ik had een vraag over waar in Nederland eigenlijk hebben wij een soort faciliteit om dagboeken goed te bewaren en te documenteren. Wie stelt zich daar centraal in op in Nederland?
So the question is there a central place or are there spaces in the Netherlands where diaries and information can be stored responsibly? And I see that. So the NIOD, the Dutch Institute for War.
I have 2 remarks.
Yes.
The first one is to answer the question. NIOD in Amsterdam, it's not complete, but they have quite a bit. And Brombeek in Arnhem also has some material. And my second remark is, the lunch has been brought in at 1 o'clock. Now it's half an hour late and it's cooling down. So I suggest we go for lunch.
Let's put it to a vote. I think everybody says yes, or.
No, I was going to answer the diary question. There are different archives. There are more than the ones mentioned, but another time. Yeah.
So, please, you can talk to Ernestine over lunch. But you have, after lunch, we will reconvene here before we go to the breakout sessions for the dialogues.
At what time, Wim? Wim, hoe laat?
It's now 1:30. Let's say 2:15. At 2. You have to be, eat quickly.